The rise of China is reshaping the world. What was a starving nation, ravaged by civil war and revolution, has become a global superpower.
The hunger for a better life was so huge that they were willing to take enormous risks and make enormous sacrifices.
The whole atmosphere at that time was this kind of hope.
They try to erase the history, erase human memories, so Chinese people cannot know their own past.
China is a haunted house. There were all these weeping ghosts in the air from all these past tragedies and disasters.
There's a perfect marriage of communism and capitalism when they matched together and created something wow.
China is not good at soft power. Plenty of hard power. But in terms of soft power, not so good.
This is exactly why the government cannot have this generation in their pockets, because they don't understand us at all.
The only way that you can say that a return to the motherland is natural is to completely disregard history.
The rise of China didn't happen overnight. Its roots reach deep into the past. And if we want to understand what's happening now, we need to dig down into the foundations of the China century. In the late 1970s, China was reeling from a decade of turmoil. The nation's cult-like ruler, Mao Zedong, was dead. His cultural revolution, which had radicalized Chinese youth into a frenzy of violence, was over. The country was emerging from a defensive crouch and opening its arms.
After Chairman Mao died, I would call it transition time. In the history, you often have dynasty changes. There's a period of time which have extreme freedom because the new dynasty doesn't recognize the rules of the past. The people start to criticize what happened in China in the past 10 years, writing some articles, and there's no magazine or newspaper, so they just post on the wall. I got into university. It was the first year of the university reopened after 10 years of shutdown during the Cultural Revolution.
Deng Xiaoping came to power and the college entrance exam was reinstated. So this was like the wildest dream come true. Nobody expected this. I mean, all of us were kind of just resigned to maybe working in the farm for years, and then maybe the lucky ones will get to the factory. But no one expected to get a real higher education. You sense this general kind of joy of a society who's been suffering under this patriarchal governance and long waiting for a turning point.
So much for the reading aloud. 朗读就坐在这儿. The children are shouting, "Help! Help!" They don't know what to do.
What do you all think as young people of the wall posters, everybody talking freely and so on? Is it a big surprise to you?
No. You see, in New China, the Constitution said that every Chinese people has freedom of speech. We can say anything we like.
Do you go and write wall posters?
You mean write posters? No,
Yeah.
I haven't. Only because I haven't time to. I think inside. But I think many young people in other factories, they write many posters.
She's too busy learning English.
In November 1978, a poster wall in Beijing became a political forum known as the Democracy Wall, condemning China's recent past and dreaming of its future.
People were criticizing the party for being autocratic, for being undemocratic. They very much saw Mao as having suffocated all alternative perspectives. They spoke of China's need for openness and democracy if it was going to become a truly modern society, capable of joining, the family of nations as an equal.
The democracy wall is totally a phenomenon with the ethos of our generation. The purpose of the Cultural Revolution was to instill a kind of revolutionary idealism into us. Some people were, being denounced as counter-revolutionaries. The Red Guards, go around beating up teachers. I watched my neighbors being beaten to death. This old man was an old scholar. That whole period was this atmosphere of such intense ideological thinking that even though later you realize a lot of it was, a lie, it still left this feeling that to have a meaningful life, you have to fight or work for a greater cause that's worthy of your idealism. And so a lot of us began to embrace new ideals such as, freedom and democracy, also with this fervor that we're the generation who's going to help change China.
China danced into the 1980s. Almost all forms of dancing had been banned during the Cultural Revolution. All except for ideological choreography, like the so-called loyalty dance, performed to demonstrate one's adoration for Chairman Mao. But in the 80s, they danced for dancing's sake.
All of us were so excited because this never happened before. I mean, during the Cultural Revolution, male student and female student didn't speak to each other. One of my roommates actually handmade some bell-bottoms pants for 4 of us. And so we all went to the dance wearing those bell-bottoms, and we were a real hit.
There were whole waves of fashion and fads that began to sweep through society. People very mysteriously started wearing double-breasted suit jackets, instead of Mao jackets. And the women started getting their hair permed. And then discos hit. It was one thing after another, which made old-fashioned Marxist-Leninists say, oh, boy, there goes the neighborhood.
The 1980s was a decade for the young. 2/3 of China's population was under 30. New leader Deng Xiaoping's policy of reform and opening up promised them economic transformation with social and political benefits.
Open and reform was the slogan leads through the 80s, introduced by Deng Xiaoping. By saying open, he didn't really vastly open the door of China, but I guess I would say you can see through a slice that he opened, maybe even through a window. 80s is the time that the whole country felt the hope and then the promises by the government. We do feel China is happening toward this direction of real openness.
Deng's famous phrase was that you can't not open the window because you're afraid of letting a few flies in, right? He could see that China would not be able to modernize if it didn't end the Maoist extremism and open up the way it did during the 1980s. The trouble is that you can get so many flies and mosquitoes inside, it's pretty hard to sleep at night. And I think this is the basic tension in the 1980s, that tension between reforming and maintaining this old retrograde one-party system, which depends on propaganda, unity, discipline, all of these things. And of course, that all came a cropper in 1989.
The 1989 student movement was initiated demanding political reform. We want China to go further on the direction of the promises of Deng Xiaoping. That's it. You promised us, we want it.
When the demonstration started in April, the whole city of Beijing was transformed into this kind of ocean of, idealism. Wu Kaixi just kind of burst onto the scene from nowhere. He had this sort of natural, skills of someone who can rouse the crowd.
We were good students of the Communist Party. They taught us that if you want to come to power, if you want to get anything done, you need to get organized.
When students start to occupy Tiananmen Square, I start to feel quite excited. I was in the United States at that time, watching television 24 hours a day. You see those very innocent faces, and they demand to have some very limited freedom.
We need to sit down on the same table. The people's government needs to listen to us. We have a lot of demands, but the demands must be heard. Dialogue is the first stage of all our demands.
After 4 weeks of marches, class boycotts, and rallies, the students' demand for dialogue had not been met.
We decided the only logical next step is apply more pressure. Hunger strike seems to be a very logical next move.
你们请你们尊重一下绝食的人好不好？你们两个人，如果你们要找我的话，我们出去换个地方，咱们给绝食的人给一个好的环境，好不好？
When we called, about 2,000 to 3,000 students answered. It moved people. 5 days after we entered the hunger strike, Li Peng, the premier of the regime, he wants to see us. Wow. So maybe this pressure will eventually lead to this showdown, the dialogue we wanted.
Wu Kaixi, he'd been hunger fasting, arrived in pajamas with an oxygen pillow and very, very dramatic. And they had made an arrangement that it would be aired live all across the nation.
He came in late, about 20 minutes, and then he started his monologue, lecturing.
北京已经是秩序大乱，而且波及到全国。我可以告诉同学们。
And then I felt at that time I needed to cut him off.
迅速答复我们的条件，因为广场上同学正在挨饿，如果再不行，还在这个问题上纠缠的话，那么我们认为政府毫无解决问题的诚意。那么我们这
It was just 沃尔凯西 on the stage. He, in some ways, is also a true child of the Cultural Revolution. He knows how to confront what he sees as an enemy or as a rival, which is, you charge straight at him.
We demand to enter the immediate core of this dialogue. And Mr. Premier, you are not 20 minutes late. You are 1 month late.
It really wasn't a dialogue. It was each side saying to the other, okay, you're going to listen to me now. So it didn't ever have a great prospect of working anything out in any way. The Chinese Communist Party was never going to yield to these students. The party does not share power. Never has, and it never will.
You cannot bargain with the Chinese Communist regime. It's impossible. And they will do anything to crush the people down if there's any questioning about their legitimacy or control.
2 days after the failed dialogue, the government declared martial rule. Paramount leader Deng Xiaoping had lost patience. On June 3rd, he ordered the army to clear the square.
We heard in the evening of June 3rd that the advancing troop has already started shooting real ammunition. Already casualties have occurred. I couldn't believe that this order was coming from the top to shoot, to kill. But pretty soon you can understand the regime have decided to clear the square at all cost. Actually, at the cost of people's life. The rest is the history.
The loss is immeasurable. Young people with aspirations, they thought they were expressing real concerns of the whole country, and that they were, in effect, trying to help. I think they generally believe that. But I think in the present atmosphere, that kind of faith and idealism would be very difficult to sustain. So I'm afraid, rather like as a consequence of the Cultural Revolution, one of the consequences would be similar, is that a young generation would now become very cynical and very cautious about anything they do or say. And in fact, choosing, in the majority of cases, to err on the side of caution and security for their families, safety for themselves, and so on.
The crackdown of 1989 shattered the dream of China's youth for a say in their country's future. Where hope had bloomed, a void set in. The generation who believed that they would be the ones to change China had been changed themselves.
a lot of people who were formerly in the 1980s were politically engaged, and of course, especially among the educated, the intellectuals and artists, all had to adjust themselves to this new ocean of unknown.
In the 1990s, on the outskirts of the capital, where the rents were cheap, Beijing's artists found a space to dream more modestly.
公安没什么麻烦，你给我们在这儿住吧，都办的那个暂时那个居住证，跟警察处的都不错。
These look like paintings with a fairly strong political message. What do they mean?
政治内容好像就是当兵的和那些穿军装的，就感觉好像有政治内容，其实没，我好像没有多少就是想搞政治那方面的倾向，没有。
Because the memory of the Tiananmen crackdown was so fresh, people were very watchful about not touching the so-called sensitive, topics. And so the artists had to, either self-censor themselves by avoiding these topics or only expressing them in codes.
Why are there so many smiling faces?
这是因为，我个人还有一种乐观的情绪。
What about this one here? Why is Tiananmen upside down and Mao the right way up?
我可能就是要让观众看他的时候，能够想得多一点，看的时间长一点，没有什么特别的。
If you wanted to paint paintings with a strong political message, do you think you'd be free to do that?
这个我也不会那么画，不会那么画，不会那么画。
In the 90s in China, politics and ideals were out. Laying low and making money were in.
Everybody in China, from the top, the leadership, to the villager, they all want to become rich, and they all do all kind of unthinkable things to become rich.
Jiang Xingqing left a desk job to sell detergent to China's rising middle class for that entrepreneurial icon Amway, short for the American way. Today, he does more than sell products, he sells the dream itself.
There were all these American companies rushing into China, and you got these kind of frothy, heady joint ventures, and the oddest things were going on.
在家里面炒菜以后，炒菜的时候不小心，嘣，一个油点碰到脸上，怎么办？有的人可能去找香油，去找什么乱七八糟的，找那个牙膏，对不对？但你会发现，安利这个东西，稍微喷一点抹上去，不会起泡泡。对，不会起泡泡。两个手是用力的哈，一起均匀的，比如说1、7、8、9、10、11。
In the wake of a disaster that you can't control, you have this feeling of, fatalism. That now I better just make the best of whatever is available and allowed. The popular phrase of the day was jumping into the sea. If you can swim, you hopefully will survive and make a fortune. This was the atmosphere in the early 90s. The junkie atmosphere, where commerce and escapism were all happening. But I think deep down, that wears out after some time, and people realize there's still this sort of hollowness, a certain spiritual thirst that was not being filled up.
所以说，像这一片就构成了对金融大厦非常好的一个风水。
喂，你好，你来啦，欢迎你来，谢谢，来到我家里玩，行，谢谢。
When I got to China in the 1990s, religion was a massive story. The whole spiritual side of China was fascinating to me. This 54-year-old housewife claims she's a spirit medium, and for a price, she will read your future. She believes her body has been possessed by the spirit of a local Taoist god named Heavenly Lord Zhao. Chen Rongqin's husband is out of work. She has a sick infant and can't make ends meet.
没财，有财呀，啊，财多不多？财多中等的，也不算太多。
As people are seeing this huge amount of change and development happening around them, sometimes it's very uneven, sometimes it's very unfair. And I think people were hungry for belief.
A spiritual revival gripped China in the 1990s, as Chinese re-embraced practices that had been outlawed during the Cultural Revolution.
Most of the Chinese people, including the party leaders themselves, have basically come to realize that the communist ideology, that was a form of state religion, really, was empty. It went bankrupt. And so we searched for alternatives.
The Chinese Communist Party tried to accommodate this huge resurgence in belief by setting up organizations to control religion. So they wanted religion to grow under its auspices. They set up bodies to oversee the church, the Chinese Protestant Organization, the Patriotic Catholic Association. But of course, the head of that church wasn't the Pope, it was some guy in China.
I think they recognize that allowing some kind of religious belief does take a certain pressure off. But then people started to develop things called home churches, which were outside of this structure, that made the party very wary.
花被凋谢，你看花很好看，很美丽吧？过了3天怎么样？ We have been following Jesus more than 60 years, but what live on? Psalm 23, the first verse.
Do you think the party wants to control religion?
但不信仰有神的，处处限制宗教。宪法说宗教自由，但是也忘记。
The thing about house churches is that these were people who wanted to worship their way, and they wanted their own brand of teaching. And as we know, China fears powerful individuals who can possibly influence large numbers of people. And of course, very symptomatic of that was the rise of Falun Gong.
Falun Gong combined a New Age philosophy of self-healing with the traditional Chinese meditation practice of Qigong.
The Chinese government saw Falun Gong as a threat because the
Guy who'd set it up, Li Hongzhi, Master Li, he was once feted by the Chinese Qigong establishment, if you like.
好了，大家身体放松。你想一下要去那个病之后，就不要再想了，看我。好，放松，放松，放松，放松。好了，活动一下。好，好不好啊？
But he left China. And so he became this entity that was trying to control followers, practitioners from outside China. That's always a big issue for the Chinese Communist Party. They don't want someone from outside controlling practitioners, but of course the internet was well and truly established by then, and he could do that.
Master Li definitely was a quite brilliant spiritual entrepreneur. And you didn't see the scale of the organization and the determination of its members until this incident.
In April 1999, in response to mounting criticism of Falun Gong, more than 10,000 of its followers staged a silent protest around Communist Party headquarters in Beijing.
Lines of people ringed the central leadership compound. Nobody was speaking, no one said a word. It would have to be one of the eeriest days I've ever had as a correspondent.
That really scared them. And that was the beginning of the banishment of Falun Gong from China.
In July 1999, the government declared Falun Gong a dangerous cult and launched a campaign to eradicate the group from China through a combination of imprisonment, execution, and forced re-education.
The Communist Party is the biggest cult in China. So when a cult sees another cult, it immediately recognizes what it is.
当他们摆脱了李洪志的精神控制之后，精神面貌焕然一新，以积极的态度来对待生活，对政府的挽救充满了感激之情。
It's exactly the same ritual. You always have to go through this intense study and emerge embracing the party. And then you have to publicly renounce your past wrong belief.
这里头非常祥和，我们的干警嘛，拿着我们就像孩子一样，耐心地说服教育，让我们真正从思想上认识到它的泯灭人性的本质。
法轮功是邪教。法轮功是邪教。法轮功是邪教。
Since then, of course, any religious practice that might be labeled as a cult, the party's impulse is to pull the legs out from under them. In later times, we see certain businesses that get to have almost a cult figure, or at least a founder that's so famous and so powerful and so influential that they get to be a threat.
千万不要来了，你们就不用来了啊。No matter whatever changes, every government, every people love to have a business to see the prosperity of the business. Right? You may have political problems here and there, but nobody wants to have business problems. Alibaba is going to have business.
What we saw in the early days of the internet in China early part of this century, as the China boom began to come to the fore, people like Jack Ma, they were considered what China called national champions, because China needed this kind of energy. They recognized they needed the internet for innovation purposes. But on the other hand, they recognized that it could be tremendously deleterious to their ability to control things.
I started to touch a computer in 2005, writing my blog. Immediately, I fall in love with internet, only because in China, it's so rare for anybody to speak out. Now you have this technology every day where really have a daily write on internet. You know, I was so happy. I said, why we have to walk on street or square, you know, very easy. You can have a right just immediately, you know, people respond to it. Everybody discuss about it. I used to think, give me 3 years, everything will change. That time, Chinese government still haven't figured out how to do the censorship very well. They don't know how to deal with this kind of blocks.
The bloggers are individuals who are able to write about issues they're passionate about, they're concerned, and not assigned to them. Some of these bloggers actually went out to the rural areas to cover certain issues that was falling outside the coverage of state media.
Zhang Shihe left a job in advertising to blog about China's underclass.
所以我写的时候只是靠本能，我是在说真话还是假话，对吧？我是在恶毒，对某件事情进行攻击吗？还是为了它改正、缓和向上？哎，我是掌握这我就足以了，对吧？如果为此我要是锒铛入狱，或者是出现什么情况的话，我在所不惜，对吧？因为我没错，是他们错了，显然是他们错了，对吧？我是这样认为的。
那外边影响挺大的。
Zhang was part of a shift in the mid-2000s, when many of China's activists and dissidents moved online.
There are people who would be covering, you know, like corruption of local officials or how the environmental effects on some of these local people by polluted waters from the state factories.
您有没有您写过的文章被封锁了？
有。
那是关于什么题目？
题目现在准确记不住了，但是内容是有关那个奥运的。
As part of its bid for the 2008 Olympics, the Chinese government had promised to make improvements in human rights and civil liberties. Online dissidents claimed what it delivered was a facade of social harmony, maintained by censorship.
Everybody is waiting for Olympics to show the world we are speaking the same language. You know, they welcome the world to come to China, to glamorize the whole achievement of the Communist Party. I was involved in designing the so-called bird nest, the national stadium. And I realized that about a year before the opening 2008 on my blog, I announced I'm not going to be part of this propaganda.
Olympic 好，奥林匹克，因为在中国也开把我们家房子拆了，对，你知道吧？都在这北京这把我们家房子拆了，讲拆奥林匹克，房子也拆了，伤害老百姓的利益，也没有生活来源。就奥林匹克说给我们解决这些重大上访问题，重复的到现在没有解决。奥运会的人权来给解决我们的问题，可是奥运会没有给中国带来人权的改善。
China's ancient offline version of calling out official wrongdoing is known as the petition system. Petitioners travel to provincial offices and wait their turn to air their grievances. Many are never heard.
快到了，让我们睡马路边上，睡桥底下，吃饭的地儿、睡觉的地儿都没有。而且大份小份都把我软禁，还有的给劳教，天灾人祸有人管，这人没人没人，就是县长对我非常气，非常生气，居委会、派出所跟派出所都看着你，这不能警告你、惩罚你，这拘留你。
In the lead up to the Beijing Olympics, many petitioners were arrested or jailed.
Before hosting the Olympics, the Chinese Communist Party have been very careful in controlling its own image for the outside world and the absolute obsession with unity, a top-down unity, that all Chinese have to be united around a state agenda.
Millions of petitioners has been removed from Beijing because of Olympics, and dissidents, freelance writers have been put into jail because they publish articles on the website. We are not here to celebrate. The Chinese people are suffering.
Three months before the opening of the Olympic Games, a devastating earthquake hit Sichuan province. Up to 90,000 people were killed or disappeared, among them thousands of children. A disproportionate number of the buildings that collapsed were state-funded schools.
然后就我和我的同学趴在了地上，最后那个楼就垮了，我们被埋在了里面。当时里面是漆黑的一片，我心里有些害怕，然后当时听到了底下的同学在哭喊，在喊救命，喊妈妈爸爸。
而且出事了，这房子垮塌了之后，是1-2个小时没得校方的、学校方的没得负责人，政府没得人出来，全是这家长自己在讨小娃娃。就像这也是我们是最寒心、最伤心的事情。
结果到后头
到那个看到大娘底下那要那开个大娘底下要到的，我就看，我看了他的倒拐子，反正自己娃娃的体型嘛，也眼就盯到我看。
Immediately after the earthquake, the government were welcoming outside support and coverage, but that window quickly was shut down. Because once the government realized the investigation was revealing deeper problems, corrupt enforcement of these school constructions, and also some of the parents were quite loud and insistent in having a proper investigation. This was too much for the government.
Thousands of students died, but the state will never release those names. So I made a so-called citizen investigation.
后头里面一么多娃儿的生气，都在喊阿姨妈妈，我不想死，救救我们！阿姨妈妈，我不想死，救救我们！我们那时跌了好惨，有好多娃娃根本那个根本就是有力量把我们救出来，活生生把憋死后的。
他们为啥子不修好？原因在哪里西？他们就是说，只图把钱往自己的包包头揣。水泥该买10吨，水泥该买1000吨，他只用100吨。
电视被电天干，走，我。
特别糟糕，它没有就是大的构造筑啊，这些基本上没有。钢筋第一个数量少，二个规格小。混凝土，它那个混凝土的标号，一个是很低，二个和得相当不合格。
他们那些就那天晚上就传唤啊，13位家长去，他们那些胆小的就给我们写，就说我不上访了，我就没有写，最后把我们5个家长就弄去拘留。
地球转换你知道，你为啥不向中央报呢？你一天在勘察地震啊。
What we found out through our investigation is there's a huge corruption, so they would stop you to investigate. Police arrest us around a few dozen times, and they would delete our research, delete our photos or videos. But still, we managed, after almost a 1-year effort, to locate 5,219 students. Name, birthday, their family address, their parents. Every day, I'm posting the new findings on my blog till one day they shut it off. They cannot bear it anymore.
只不过我这个人，我只有恨，只有怨。我怨自己不该把弄的那所学校去读书，我恨那些讲座上，他让那些无辜的孩子失去了生命。真的，我这个人啥子都没得，我啥子希望，他是为希望，他是为支撑，啥子都没得了。我这个人说啥的都没用了。真的，我这个人只有恨，我恨只有怨。我啥子力气连啥子力气都没了。
In September 2008, a government committee admitted that poor construction may have contributed to the collapse of schools. The government has denied allegations of corruption and refused to make an official apology.
The Communist Party has made so many horrible mistakes in its history. With the early purges, the Great Famine of the 1960s, with the Cultural Revolution, the deaths of millions, there are so many skeletons in the party's closet that it cannot apologize for anything. In the Chinese patriarchal mind, if a father admits he's wrong, it loses authority in the eyes of all children. You weigh that against adding a few more skeletons in the closet, it's a no-brainer. You have a large closet, you keep on putting it in, but it's still your closet. You're still the master of the house. I mean, China is, in fact, a haunted house. There were all these weeping ghosts in the air from all these past tragedies and disasters, but it has no real way of turning the house upside down, because the master is still running the house.
Since 2012, China's master has been Xi Jinping, a strongman ruler who has purged his rivals, centralised power in his own hands, and removed the term limit on his presidency. Xi's autocratic style has led to comparisons with Mao. He's the only leader other than Mao to have his own thought enshrined in the constitution within his lifetime. Can he command the same cult-like loyalty to turn his vision into reality?
习大大的确做了很多好事，一开始就，禁止贪污啊，然后也，抓了不少坏人，然后还是举措还是蛮大的，相对以前的一些，所以普遍的人民还是喜欢习大大的。
I think what we see under Xi Jinping is a recrudescence of that sort of genetic material that Mao Zedong left on the Chinese genome, and it's re-expressing itself. He came of age during the Cultural Revolution. That's where he acquired his toolkit.
The signature policy of Xi's presidency is what he calls the China dream, the dream of a powerful, prosperous, and beautiful nation that Xi insists is the shared dream of all Chinese people.
The China dream is grand indeed, but it is an incomplete dream. I do not think we should detract one iota from the part of the dream that they have accomplished, which is the dream of China becoming materially wealthier and powerful, and it should be acclaimed. The part of the dream, I think, which is still missing is on the non-material side, whether it's literature, art, religion, this realm of what we might call spiritual or other than material. And this is precisely because that interior realm of any human being is highly individual. And it can be highly insubordinate. All of the things which the party has never esteemed.
For more than 2,000 years, China had a long and glorious tradition that you could say is spiritual, but it was never somehow able to kind of break the shackle of the orthodox, that you have to accept the system, you have to live with it, and this perhaps is in our DNA. This is the Chinese way. I don't think most Chinese people feel that there's really a big need to change the system, because the system is what got us here. we're now powerful and prosperous. So the Communist Party was the right leader, the strong father. When you say to people, you need to break out and try to, say, jump in the ocean, swim into the unknown, which has the name of liberty, they think you're crazy. They think you're, trying to kill them. Especially in the context of a period of, Western problems. If one day there's enough of them who say, look, I want a different way of life, I want more than this, then maybe that's the time for change. Only the Chinese people can decide what they want and where they want their country to go.
Next time, in the China Century, the cost of China's economic miracle.
There's a deal of money and power, a perfect marriage, evil perfect marriage of communism and capitalism, when they matched together and created something, wow.